Hi, I'm Mark Johnson, Sweetwater Sales Engineer. Today we're going to go through tuning your drum kit. First things first, before you put the new head on, take time and wipe off your bearing edge. You get dust, you get sawdust, you get a bunch of stuff built up on that, and it's just going to make your life more difficult. So take your time, wipe off the bearing edge, put the new head on. When the head's on, put your hand right in the middle and press down. You should hear it snap, crackle, and pop. It's a good sign. That means the head is now touching the bearing edge and should sit and tune the way you want it to. Once you've got the head stretched and seated, go through and just get the lugs finger tight. Once the tension rods are all finger tight, you're ready to start tuning. I always start top right. That way I don't lose where I'm at. Quarter turn, straight across from that, number 2. Number 3, we're skipping one to the right. 3, straight across from that, number 4. Skip one to the right. 5, straight across from that. 6, skip one to the right. 7, straight across from that. 8, skip one to the right. 9, 10, straight across from that. So the pattern stays the same for a 10 lug snare or a 10 lug drum, or if it's a 6 lug drum. If you have an 8 lug drum, we'll go through that pattern in a second. But now I've got all 10 lugs done with a quarter turn. From there, I'm starting over, going back to 1. This helps keep the head tension even and will make fine tuning a lot easier when you get to that process. So another quarter turn 1, quarter turn 2, skip one to the right. 3, straight across. 4, skip one to the right. 5, straight across. 6, skip one to the right. 7, 8, 9, 10. And if you're tuning and you start hearing cracks and crinkles and pops, it's okay. It's the head pulling and stretching and sitting onto this drum the way you want it to. If you don't hear those pops, chances are it's not sitting properly and you might be unevenly tuning. So don't worry when you hear those pops, it's all good. All right, so we've got the drum pretty close. We've got it up to a pretty good pitch. From here, we start to fine tune, depending on the style of music, what you're playing, where you're playing. This is where we get into nuance of the tuning process. If you want to go higher, if you really want to crank on it, go higher, go another round. If you want to go deeper, you don't have to tune the whole drum. Honestly, we can drop just one of these tuning lugs and get a deeper sound. Really fattens it up. Now let's flip this over, take a look at the bottom. Tuning the snare side of the snare drum doesn't happen very often, but when it does, when it's that time, it's really important we get it right, just because this head is a lot thinner and we want to make sure that tension's even. That way we don't risk snapping that head. So to do this, I loosen the snares and then I take a drumstick, carefully slide it underneath here. And that'll take care of any unwanted buzz while we're doing our tuning. And then you follow the same pattern as we did with the batter side. Same pattern, keeping things nice and even. I really like to go tight with this snare side head. Not too tight, but the tighter we can get it, the more activation we're gonna get from these snares and the more buzz we're gonna get. So go slow and try to get as much tension as you can out of this bottom head without the risk of breaking it. So before you finish up tuning your snare drum, it's always a good practice to check your tuning. What I typically do is I put a stick in the middle and go around and tap each lug try to get everything as close as you can. That sounds pretty close. I'm happy with that. So let's see how it sounds. Sounds pretty good to me. So now I want to show you the pattern for a 6-lug drum. Same starting point, we get the new head on, and then we're pressing firmly into the center of the drum to seat this head. Same as before, start on the top right. Everything's already finger tight here. So quarter turns, start nice and slow. Skip one, go to the right. Straight across. Skip another one, go to the right. Straight across. That's all 6 lugs. Now we just start back from the beginning. Quarter turn, straight across, quarter turn, skip one to the right, quarter turn, straight across, quarter turn, skip 1 lug to the right, quarter turn, straight across. So that's a good starting point. Depending on if you want more resonance, less resonance, you can throw some dampening from here. Unlike the snare drum, I try to keep all the lugs on the toms pretty even. If we need a deader sound for live, we can detune. If we're playing jazz, feel free to crank that up. And now we're really just fine tuning the drum. When you're tuning the bottom head of a tom-tom, you definitely want the bottom head to be tighter than the batter head. This creates a pitch bend down versus an awkward pitch bend up. So what I do with my tom-toms, same pattern, but I like those to be a little bit higher than the batter head. Try not to go too tight with your resonant head. If we go too high, it's gonna choke the drum and you're not gonna get a whole lot of resonance. So now we're gonna go through tuning an 8-lug drum because that pattern is just a little bit different from the 6 and the 10-lug drums. So same as always, I've got things about finger tight and then we set the head. Cracks and pops are good. Set. Like I said, things are about finger tight right now. So we're starting from the right corner as always. Straight across. This is where things get different. We're skipping 2 to the right. We're not skipping 1, we're skipping 2 lugs to the right. So 1, 2, quarter turn, straight across. Skip 2 to the right. 1, 2. Straight across. Skip another 2 to the right. Straight across. If at any point you forget where you're at, I've always just gone back to the beginning. I loosen the drum completely and just start over. If I forget where I'm at and I try to keep going, I end up with an uneven drum and it doesn't sound very good. So if at any point you lose your spot, just start over. It's always fine to take it back to finger tight, start in the top right, and start over. If you start bringing it up to pitch and you hear your drum buzzing, chances are something is still loose and it's not quite tight enough to play yet. So go another quarter turn, half turn until you get rid of that buzz. While you're tuning drums, it's important to get comfortable. It's no point in rushing through and trying to rush through tuning, getting a bad drum sound if you're not comfortable. So if sitting down works for you, sit down, take it to a table, just get comfortable, that way you're not rushing through and potentially getting a bad drum tone. For example, I've got this drum set up on the floor. For bigger drums, they tend to ring a little more. So for a floor tom, I might bring this up just a little tighter to get a little less ring out of it, a little less resonance. So resonant heads might not always sound good. That's not really what I'm worried about. I'm more worried about what the batter head is going to sound like when I flip it over. So let's see. It's a good starting point for me. From here, it really depends if you're doing live, studio, if you need more resonance, less resonance. From here, it's really up to you. For live, I tend not to let the drums sing as much. Overtones through a PA system are feedback city all the time, so I try to keep my drums pretty dead on stage. In a studio, you really want the tone of the drum, so I tend to let those ring just a little bit more. Now we're gonna work on the bass drum. Bass drum is an 8-lug drum, so we're gonna use the same pattern as we did on that floor tom. So I flipped the kick on its side for easier access to the lugs. It makes tuning a lot easier. I've already got things finger tight. Things are pretty loose. I haven't set the head yet, but when I do, I expect to hear a bunch of cracking, a bunch of pops. That's, again, totally normal. I want that to happen. That way I know the head is actually sitting on the drum. So I just set the head. I'm gonna start in the top right. I'm gonna follow the 8-lug pattern, skipping 2 lugs to the right. So the bass drum is one of those that I like to have just loose enough that we don't have any rattling. So I've got these pretty well tightened. I'm gonna go one more round, just doing a quarter turn, so I can get a nice punchy sound out of it. Now let's see how that sounds. That's a good starting point for me. Now I'm gonna flip it over. I'm gonna do the same thing to the resonant side. Just keep things tight enough so they don't jingle, so you don't hear the tension rods rattle when you hit it. There is a little bit of dampening in there right now, but depending on your music style, you may want more or less. So these are my preferences. These are not like guitar strings where they have to be on the pitch. This is total user preference. So if you're playing a gig and you need a big fat drum sound, then detune these a little bit, throw some gaff tape on them, and deaden them up. If you're playing jazz, crank them a little higher and get a nice jazz tone out of them. Hope you found this helpful. If you have questions about tuning your drums or setting up your first drum set, feel free to reach out to your Sweetwater sales engineer. I'm Mark Johnson. Thanks for watching.